The other thing that I want to mention about this film is because it's a silent film, it's going to be completely silent. And I wasn't quite sure what to do about the soundtrack. And Professor Miyao said that we can play any kind of music to go with it, that it's amazing how well silent films work with music of any kind. So I'm going to invite all of you to put yourself on mute so that we can't hear you. You may want to turn off your video because it's always easier to watch somebody else's screen if you turn off your video. But then if you're at home, just turn on your favorite music. You could play jazz, you can play classical, you can play Japanese music. Just try playing anything you feel like as you're watching the film. And then afterwards, I'm going to ask everybody if you played any music and what you played and did it work while you were watching the movie. So I invite you all to just pick your own audio soundtrack to go with the film. So it'll last just about 1 hour and 7 minutes. It stars Sessue Hayakawa. This is a spy thriller from 1917. And I'll be really interested to see what you guys think. I mean, this is very early cinema, but it's amazing to think that the star of this picture is a Japanese actor. And he's listed last in the credits because he's the star.
So is that a subtitle?
It has some subtitling in it, but a lot of it, because it's an old silent picture, the way they watched silent movies back then was you just kind of had to figure it out by watching the picture. There would be some intertitling, you know, every once in a while you'll get something, some cards with dialogue on it that will tell you what's happening, but a lot of it depends on you just kind of figuring out what's happening in the picture. And I'm going to say that the picture quality isn't great. So some of it might look kind of fuzzy to you. In fact, there will be certain scenes where the picture has washed out and that's just the film has degraded so that you're not really seeing much of the film. So it's not you, it's just the quality of the film. And there will be parts of the film that require you to read like a piece of paper that looks kind of small. That's going to be hard. If you can't read the writing, like there's handwriting and small print, if you can't read it, that's fine. You'll just kind of figure out what's going on in the story. It's your basic spy story. And we can try to figure it out later, what exactly happens. But basically, it's about a Japanese spy. This is during World War I. And so Japan and the US were allies at this point. And so there's a Japanese spy and the American government, and they are trying to outwit a German spy who's trying to get some information, some crucial battle information. And so that's the basic plot, but then there's kind of a romance going on at the same time. So I hope you enjoy it. And then we can talk about it afterwards. And then Professor Miyao will join us and he's going to talk a little bit about Hayakawa and his popularity and just the mood of the country at the time. So I hope you enjoy it. So let me get started. I'm going to share my screen. So everybody, if you want to mute yourselves and turn off your video, yes, turn on some music, no, we'll watch the film.
Let me turn on some music.
Oh, did she say to turn it on?
She said, turn on any music you like. Would you like me to turn on some music?
Everyone, you can unmute yourselves if you want, turn your videos back on. Did anybody play music to accompany their film, and what did you play?
Yes.
Dan, what did you play?
I just asked Alexa to play jazz.
And how did it work?
Well, actually, it was okay. It, like you said, it just provided a nice background to the movie. So rather than have silent,
Mhm.
so it did work.
Oh, that's good. Did anybody else play music?
I didn't have any radio or music in my office, so I couldn't play anything, but
Oh,
I had a hard time keeping track of it.
oh, did you? Okay, well, we can piece it together. Did anybody else play anything?
Yeah, I
Judy?
played some classical.
Played Coltrane. I couldn't have words, so
Ah,
Coltrane ballads worked well.
okay, nice. And Jane, what did you play?
Classical mix.
How did that work?
It worked fine.
Judy, what did you
Oh.
guys play?
We started with Hiroshima because that's what we have on our playlist. That's
Uh-huh.
instrumental.
Yeah.
And then I switched it to classical, which is a bit better.
Did you think classical was better than Hiroshima?
Yeah.
Okay. Any others?
Jerry here. We played jazz.
Bob Baldwin.
Bob Baldwin playing the
Okay.
Beatles. It was great.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there's a wonderful woman pianist. She plays at the Pacific Film Archive whenever they're showing a silent film, and she improvises piano music while the film is playing, and it's really wonderful. So if you ever get a chance to see a silent film at the Pacific Film Archive, I really recommend it. And I can't think of the woman's name right now, but she is terrific. So, you know, she really kind of follows along. She's watching the movie as she's playing the piano. And so it'll get, you know, during the suspenseful parts, she'll kind of get a little suspenseful, and, you know, she kind of matches the music to the movie perfectly. So she's pretty amazing.
Wow.
So we'll check in with everybody and get your reactions to the movie, but I see that our special guest has shown up. So Carol or Justin, I don't know if you want to put a spotlight on
Can't find him. Where is he?
Daisuke Miyao.
Yeah,
Is his,
I saw him come in, but I don't see him on here.
Uh-oh, I see him.
Oh, there he
Wait.
is. There he is. I'm
Hi,
sorry.
everyone.
Oh, wait.
There you are.
Did you
Good
get
evening.
him?
There, yes.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, great. So if everybody, if you switch over to speaker view, I think then you'll be able to see Professor Miyao and me side by side. So let me first read an introduction so that you all can hear about our special guest tonight. And then I'll let Professor Miyao take it over. So Daisuke Miyao is the Hajime Mori Chair in Japanese Language and Literature at UC San Diego. Professor Miyao received his BA in American Studies from the University of Tokyo with honor, MA in Area Studies from the University of Tokyo, MA in Cinema Studies from New York University, and PhD in Cinema Studies from New York University with distinction. Before joining the UCSD faculty in 2014, he taught at Columbia University as postdoctoral fellow in Expanding East Asian Studies program, at the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, as postdoctoral fellow in film studies, and the University of Oregon, where he chaired the Department of East Asian Languages and Literature.
Wow.
He is the author of numerous articles in Japanese and in English, and he has authored several books. I'm going to name two. One is Sessue Hayakawa, Silent Cinema and Transnational Stardom, which I believe is an an adaptation of his dissertation. And then most recently, he has published Japanese and the Birth of Cinema. That was published by Duke University Press in 2020. So we're really, I don't know what that is. But thank you so much for joining us. We're really honored to have you with us. So thanks for being here. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so very much, Kathy, for your very generous introduction. I'm delighted to be here. I'm so happy to hear that, many of you did great experiments in music. The word silent cinema is kind of misleading because, every time those films were screened in the 1900s, 19-teens, never played in silence, right? Anytime those films are played, piano accompaniment, orchestra music, or in the case of Japan, for example, there were people called benshi who explained the story, imitated the dialogue, and did whatever they wanted to add to the screen. So it was a kind of packaged entertainment. So silent cinema was never silent, so to speak. So in that sense, your experiments with jazz, pop songs, Japanese pop songs, and so on and so forth, was exactly what we should do when we watch silent films. So I'm very glad to hear that. Also, I am pleasantly surprised at continuing interests in Sessue Hayakawa. Last year, the world famous silent film festival in Pordenone, Italy, showed a 1920 film with Hayakawa, Where Lights Are Low, in which Hayakawa played a Chinese American hero. And this year, Bologna Film Festival, another film festival in Italy, they are planning to show Hayakawa's 1921 film, so the film which was made 100 years ago, The Swamp, which is preserved at a film archive in Moscow, Russia. So, this continuing interest in Hayakawa. Well, maybe it's not surprising because Hayakawa was phenomenal. He was such a big star in the silent era. Anyhow, yeah, I'd like to share. So I'd like to briefly talk about Hayakawa first, and then we want to discuss today's film, The Secret Game, together. So is it okay for me to share my screen when I talk about, yeah.
I think so.
Thank you,
Are
Kathy.
you have to be a co-host, I think. Oh, okay, there you are.
Yeah.
Great.
Can you see
Thanks.
my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And slideshow. Okay. Okay. So Kathy has told me that some of you are very kindly interested in my book, Sessue Hayakawa, which was published in 2007. So I have included this slide. So Hayakawa, he was born as a son of a rich fisherman in Chiba Prefecture of Japan. His father was engaged in abalone fishing, abalone business, awabi business. So he had some connections in California. So I think that was the main reason why Hayakawa came to the United States in 1909. And according to his autobiography, he studied at the University of Chicago when he arrived in the US. I have a good friend, Professor Michael Rain, who used to teach at the University of Chicago. He did some research when he was there, but he couldn't find any actual record of Hayakawa being registered at the University of Chicago. So we are not sure whether he was really there or not. But anyhow, on his way back to Japan, he stayed in LA and he appeared in some some theaters for Japanese Issei audience. And then after that, he appeared in some films in Hollywood. Hollywood was establishing itself at that time, around 1912, 1913. And they were making some films about Japan. Japan was a very popular subject matter, so Hayakawa appeared in those films. When I was writing my dissertation, yes, Kathy, you're right. My book was based on my dissertation, which I wrote for at NYU. When I was writing my dissertation, we had kind of a common ground. When I say, Hayakawa was famous for his role in The Bridge on the River Kwai, so David Lean film of 1957. Everybody was kind of nodding. Oh, okay, I know him. Okay, oh, he was that guy. And I told them that he was not actually this frowning officer, Japanese middle-aged actor, but he was a huge star during the silent period of cinema. He was as big as Charlie Chaplin and Western film star William S. Hart. He's also forgotten these days, but anyhow, he was as big as Chaplin. When I say that, people were surprised at how big Hayakawa was. But these days, even when I say Bridge on the River Kwai to my students, they don't really know about that film either. So I just say that Hayakawa was a big star in Hollywood and arguably the only Asian superstar in Hollywood films. And of course, there's a star in Hollywood Walk of Fame, Sessue Hayakawa. So Hayakawa became a superstar right after the release of this film called The Cheat. It's a 1915 film. I think Kathy has recommended to watch this film in addition to The Secret Game. This is probably the most famous silent film, or maybe the most notorious silent film that Hayakawa was in. But before this film, Hayakawa was not a star. So as you see in this publicity flyer or poster, his face is not on this film. Fanny Ward, she was a famous stage actor at that point. She was the star of The Cheat. Fanny Ward played a woman, upper middle class woman in New York. She was a society woman, extravagant woman in this film. She wants to spend, and spend. And Hayakawa was kind of her love interest and consumerism interest. He played a Japanese guy whose name is Hishiru, and he's a Japanese art dealer who is working in New York in this film. And he provided lots of beautiful objects of Japan, from Japan to Edith Hardy, played by Fanny Ward. He was a very strange character in this film. On one hand, he was a villain. On the other hand, he was a hero. So he looks like this in this film, very handsome society boy, society man from Japan, and he played around with this Edith Hardy, upper middle class woman. Her husband is a banker, investment banker, but he fails. His friend tells Edith that her husband will fail in some kind of an investment. So Edith, she was a treasurer of a Red Cross fund, uses her money to make up for her husband's potential loss. But actually, she's the one who fails. And when she fails, she's so afraid that she goes to Hayakawa whether he can help about her loss. Hayakawa, he shows his villainous side and offers her money, but for an exchange, he asks her to become his lover. Right? And when she fainted, he steals a kiss from this fainted, vulnerable woman. Well, she tells the truth to her husband. After her confession, her husband tells her that his investment was successful, so that she can pay Tori back. But Tori, the Hayakawa villainous guy, he doesn't accept the money, and he expects her to become his lover, as promised. She refuses. When she refuses, Hayakawa uses a very hot iron to brand her. Very brutal. So he was a sexy villain. He was an Americanized art dealer on the surface, but he was a sexy villain. That was his true side. So this double side character he played, he became a huge star of Hollywood. His stardom actually displayed some kind of a doubleness that Japan had at that time, the image of Japan had at that time. One of them is Japanism, popularity and influence of Japanese art and culture in Europe and in the United States since the mid-19th century. So this is one side by which Edith Fanny Ward character was attracted to the Hayakawa character. Hayakawa was a representative of Japanism, the cultural refinement, beautiful art, consumer culture. And the other horrific side of Hayakawa's character in The Cheat is the Europero, European and US fear of Asian invasions, and Japanese immigrants in California was kind of a imaginary representative of such fear, right? So Japan was on one hand very attractive, but on the other hand, very scary. And Hayakawa's stardom or star image represented both of them: cultural refinement, attraction, and the fear. Right? So it was a very important and interesting balance act that Hayakawa was playing with his character. And The Cheat represented that. And I think today's film, The Secret Game, was playing around with this double image of Japan around Hayakawa's character, Naranara. So this is what Hayakawa said after he appeared in The Cheat and became a star. He was a sexy villain. My one ambition is to play a hero. So once he became a superstar after The Cheat, yeah, sure, like The Secret Game, he played a kind of a villainous character, but he couldn't play a real villain like The Cheat. And the film studio, the Paramount studio, they started to create Hayakawa's star image around this doubleness, but not that scary, not so scary as the film The Cheat. Right? So on one hand, the Paramount company tried to publicize Hayakawa's Americanized character. He was like a model minority in the United States. This is one publicity photo that a American film fan magazine showed. Hayakawa is living like an American couple with his wife Tsuruoki. She was also a film actor. The couple is walking their dog, French bulldog. His name is Shoki. The Japanese god's name Shoki. In front of their bungalow in LA, in the suburb of LA. So this Americanized side is one important thing that the Paramount studio emphasized around Hayakawa's stardom. And the other side, Japaneseness, sometimes it turns into a villainous side of Hayakawa's star image, as you saw in The Secret Game. but this, grin Hayakawa shows with the Japanese sword, this is a cultural, the one side of a cultural refinement, but at the same time, it's scary because it's Japanese sword, isn't it? This doubleness, such ambivalent image of Japan was what the secret game, tonight's film showed, as you have seen. And this is one of the reviews that film magazines reported on the secret game, finally exemplifying the change in international relations as regards Japan and the United States. The film was released in 1917, November 1917, which was several months after the United States started to participate in World War I, right? So in this story, the representatives of the two countries are not at odds. They're working hand in hand against a common enemy, Germany. Mr. Hayakawa's Nara has a role that wins the sympathy, right? So especially with this film, Hayakawa was not really able to show his villainous side, but a sincere friend to America, according to one of the subtitles, Secret Game. You probably remember the small flags that he put on his coat, right? The American flag and the Japanese flag together. On the other hand, he is a patriot of Japan, and this shows a kind of a villainous side of his when he is about to attack the white woman character, right, toward the end. But this is the the traditional Japanese side of him. When I left Japan, according to the dialogue, my father, like a samurai of old, sent me forth, sworn to the service of my emperor, and he bade me return at the end of my service and lay my sword unstained at his feet. Right? So this is the kind of a unassimilable side of Hayakawa in the American society. Like Tori in The Cheat, Nara, the Sessue character, attacks and blackmails a white woman, but he decides a heroic death for the formation of a white American patriotic couple in the end, and the United States, right? Because of this act, because of his act, according to the film magazine, he earns the sympathy, while his character shows the doubleness that I talked about around the film The Cheat and the formation of Hayakawa's star image under the leadership of the Paramount Pictures. So yeah, that's the introduction of Hayakawa's career, and my kind of reading of tonight's film, The Secret Game. But here I want to turn to you and ask how do you like this film?
Thank you. I'm going to jump in and ask my questions.
Sure.
But also, I encourage everyone else, you can jump in and ask questions. You can type questions into the chat, whichever you feel comfortable with. But I have a couple of questions. One is very specific, and then one is maybe more general. The specific one is just, why in his movies, why does he have these ridiculous names? Like, why couldn't he just be called Hayakawa? Why does he have to be called Nada? I mean, that's just nonsensical, right? Whose decision was that, and why was that?
Excellent question. In The Cheat, his name was Hishiro Tori. That's a very strange Japanese name as well. In Nara, it's a strange Japanese name again. In his films that, in the films that he appeared with Paramount, his name was really, really strange. So he kept playing, those strange names. I don't know, maybe those names sound very Japanese to the American audiences, or at least to the Paramount executives. because in 1918, so 1 year after The Secret Game, he established his own production company. It was called Hayworth Pictures Company. And after he established his own company, the characters' names that he played, they became real Japanese, like Goro or Takashi, or those, the actual Japanese names. So Hayakawa knew that, he was playing a very strange Japanese named characters with Paramount. So that was, the company's choice. They sounded Japanesque or Japanese to them, and Hayakawa didn't say no to them. He was very good at the balancing act, his Americanized self and the Japaneseness. So in order to maintain, or in order to establish his stardom, he knew, he knew what he should say. So when necessary, he said no, but when unnecessary, he didn't. He just let it go.
So I'm glad you mentioned in your talk, kind of the context of how Hayakawa became so popular, but it was very problematic, right? It was not straightforward, and a lot of it had to do with just the conditions in the world at the time. I mean, there was a lot of anti-Asian legislation. There was just a lot of discrimination. There was growing anti-Japanese sentiment. And so it's really kind of astonishing that he was popular, under these conditions. And one of the things in your book that I found super interesting was you coin a term that W.E.B. Du Bois uses, double consciousness.
Yes.
Right? That we have to sort of look at Hayakawa's popularity or his status through the lens of white America and what they wanted, what they expected to see. And he had to sort of satisfy that. But then you bring up a term that you call triple consciousness, which is what I want to bring up because, our group is, a Japanese American centric group.
Right.
Triple consciousness would refer to another audience that Hayakawa was playing to, and that was the Japanese audience, the Japanese American audience in the United States, and the Japanese audience in Japan. So can you talk a little bit about how he was received in those communities?
Right, exactly. Yeah, thank you for bringing those concepts up. Yes, like I said, Hayakawa was very good at balancing act. So like you said, Kathy, he was aware of, and he was very conscious about at least 3 different audiences of his films and his stardom: white American, Japanese American, and Japanese audiences in Japan. So to be honest, he was not able to do that simultaneously. So at one point, he turned to the white Americans and I'm a very Americanized guy, or to the Japanese American audiences, I am very patriotic and I'm thinking about the Japanese community and so on and so forth. And to the Japanese audiences, I am the model for modernizing the Japanese films, which was still, under the very strong influence of kabuki and shinpa. So he was playing, lots of different, faces and the roles throughout his career. I could add the 4th face of Hayakawa, after he had to leave Hollywood because, the anti-Japanese sentiment, anti-Japanese movements became really harsh toward the end of the 1920s. He went to France and he spent the whole war years in Paris, appearing in several French movies because he was very popular in France as well. So in that sense, he was kind of catering to the audience in France who were truly attracted to Japanism since the the mid 19th century. Impressionist painters, post-impressionist painters, those people who are attracted and impacted by the art and culture of Japan since the mid 19th century. So in that sense, he was a very global person. In a strategic manner, he knew what he was doing, and he knew what would cater to different types of audiences.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to sneak in one question. I said I was only going to ask two, but I just have to sneak this in. Since you mentioned France, I know that there were anti-miscegenation laws in the United States at the time, and that sort of kept Hayakawa from winning the girl, say, in American movies, that he always had to sacrifice himself because it would have been against the law for him to win. In France, was that the same situation? Did they have anti-miscegenation laws, or was he allowed to get the girl, or to be the hero in France?
Well, legally speaking, I don't think so. I mean, France was, the story was different. It was a different story. But still, Hayakawa's star image was already so big that, the self-sacrificing hero for white women, that image was so big that Hayakawa, repeatedly played a similar type of roles in France. Well, actually, he appeared in a remake of The Cheat, which is called Forfeiture. It's a 1937 film made in France. So in that sense, he was kind of repeating himself. He was aware of what was expected to him, and he played that role.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat, so I'm going to read it. You mentioned kabuki, so we have one question from Margot. His face and facial expressions seem to come straight out of kabuki theater. Influence of kabuki on his acting style?
Well, that's a very good question. Actually, Hayakawa himself, in some interviews, saying that his acting style was heavily influenced by kabuki and the technique called harage, stomach technique or something, the direct translation. So in contrast to the Western style of melodramatic acting using bodies in an exaggerated manner, Hayakawa says he doesn't move his bodies at all. Even he doesn't move his facial muscle at all. But so it's like a method acting. He thinks about various emotions, and according to him, what he's thinking, what his emotions, it appear on his face, especially his eyes. That's his way of acting. According to him, that's a kabuki influenced acting style. But to be honest, he was not trained as an actor at all. He didn't have any training in kabuki. He said he was a big fan of Danjuro, the most popular, most famous kabuki actor at that time. But once again, I believe he was trying to cater to those audiences who were expecting him to be a descendant of kabuki actor or something like that. He wanted to show that okay, I can do kabuki, and my performance is like kabuki or something like that. But speaking of the makeup, especially when you see a film like The Cheat, I also think the makeup of Hayakawa is so white and so exaggerated in terms of the dark eyebrows, and they look very similar to kabuki. And I can't find any evidence, written evidence of how they came up with those makeups for Hayakawa. But maybe kabuki was already played several times in the United States. So maybe the Hollywood producers were recreating a kabuki type of makeup to Hayakawa, especially when he wears Japanese kimono or Japanese costumes in his house in The Cheat, the film. Right? So there may be a direct connection between kabuki's makeup, or especially the exaggerated kabuki makeup with Hayakawa in his films.
Yeah, Hayakawa is a very interesting person, very complex and kind of contradictory. And I was never quite, I don't think we really know who he is, even in his autobiography, I think, right? As you said, we kind of have to take what he said with a grain of salt. And I think it's because he was trying to please so many different audiences at the same time.
Right.
So Jane asks, she says, I am reading your book about Hayakawa and impressed with how much detail you have about him. How long have you been researching his life?
Oh, okay. Let's see. I studied. Now I remember. Yeah. In retrospect, I studied in my interest in Hayakawa in 1993. Actually, I didn't know anything about Hayakawa before that, but I was a second year MA student in Tokyo. And there was a film festival, silent film festival at the Tokyo National Film Center. It was called Tokyo National Film Center at that time. It's a National Film Archive now. But anyhow, they did a festival called the American Film Little Known. And The Cheat, the 1915 film The Cheat, was included in that program. And I became familiar with Hayakawa's work for the first time by watching The Cheat, and I was astonished. Who is this guy? And I started, looking for books, articles about him, and I could only find one or two, very short biographies, and in his autobiography, and there was no serious research on him, and so after I came to the United States, I started the actual archival research in old film magazines and newspapers, and I watched as many films as possible. Only 1/3, maybe 1/4 of Hayakawa films are available. Many of them are lost. But in any case, I watched as many films as possible when I was writing my dissertation. So in that sense, I submitted my dissertation in 2003. So that was for how many years? 10 years. And after that, the book was published in 2007. So 1993 to 2007, how many years? 14. Thank you for the question, Jane.
Yeah, it's there really isn't that much known about him before your book, and it's kind of a shame that so many of his movies are lost to us. I think you were able to read some of the original scripts, and that's why you were able to talk about some of his films.
Yes, the Motion Picture Academy Library in Los Angeles, La Cienega Boulevard, they have very interesting Paramount script collection. So Hayakawa films before he established his own company, so the films before 1918, most of them are preserved there. I mean, the scripts are preserved there. So I was fortunate enough to read those scripts there.
Great. I will read Kazue's 2 questions, but then I also want to encourage people, we can open up the mics and you can ask your questions directly to Professor Miyao. And also for you Japanese speakers out there, this could be your chance to ask a question in Japanese. And no translation, well, some translation will be necessary because we won't know what's happening, but I encourage all questions to come. So let me ask Kazue's 2 questions. 1, was Hayakawa fluent in French? And 2, because he was in France during World War II, is that right?
Right.
And then what was his last English speaking movie?
What was his last English speaking movie? That's a good question. I have to double check, but The Bridge on the River Kwai was one of the last, I think. Was he fluent in French? I think he was confident in his French. There was some recording of Hayakawa speaking French, and it's definitely better than my French. Yeah. No, he was a very confident guy. So even if his stardom came during the silent period, I think he was easily able to move to the talkies, talking pictures. And even though Hayakawa's character in the Bridge on the River Kwai, he's kind of silent person. He doesn't talk much. But still, when he speaks, it was fine, yeah, his language skills, at least, his confidence made him a very, understandable person in his speech.
Although I did read that when he first tried to speak, when the talking pictures started in the US, his accent was so heavy that audiences were kind of turned off by it, and so that was a problem.
Right. Yeah. Many of the silent film actors, they were not able to survive because of the transition. But in the case of Hayakawa, Kathy, you're right. But at the same time, he was able to survive, and he appeared in many films after that. So yeah.
Tying in with Jill's question, which is next. Did he make any films in Japan?
Yes.
And how did the people of Japan feel about him? Did they consider him one of their own, or did they consider him too American for them?
It's another doubleness, yes, the Japanese reception, the Japanese reaction to Hayakawa was very interesting too. At the very beginning, he was hated a lot. He was even called a national traitor, appearing in those notorious films like The Cheat, playing those brutal, savagery character. That was really they thought those would go against that Japanese national policy, but at the same time he became a superstar in the United States in the rising film industry, right? So they had to admit that, the Japanese people had to admit, we would like to become like Hayakawa, and he is a national hero, working alone in the United States, becoming a superstar in Hollywood. So he was hated, but at the same time, he was liked a lot as well. So when he made films in Japan, yeah, he was a national hero, but at the same time, he was an American person, the person who came from the United States. So he, once again, Hayakawa was playing a balancing act, right? Yes, I am a Hollywood hero from the United States, but at the same time, I am a patriotic Japanese person who works for them from the bottom of my heart, something like that. So it's a very nice balancing act.
So Kazue adds to her previous questions. Wasn't he in Come See the Paradise, a cameo? I don't know that film. So
Come See the Paradise. It's maybe in the 80s, right? I think Hayakawa was already dead. Come See the Paradise. He died in 1973. So yeah. I don't think he was in it. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'm talking about a different film. But if you are talking about the 1980s film, yeah, he was not there any longer. So yeah.
Okay. So if anybody else has a question, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, I was curious, in a silent movie, is there actually a script that's being spoken that follows the action in the movie?
Yes, I think so in most cases. But of course, they are silent films. They didn't really have to, speak the exact language that was necessitated. So in some cases, the director who are, standing right next to the movie camera, they told the actors what they needed to speak. and those actors just moved their mouth, something like what the director told them, and kept their acting. So it was not that strict, as far as I know.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I see Ellen's hand.
Oh, Ellen, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I just have two questions. One was about the movie, the character, Mrs. Harris.
Mhm.
Why was that role portrayed by a man?
Good question. To be honest, I don't know, but it adds a strangeness and some strange gender relations in that film. So I think it's working very nicely. Yeah, but the exact reason, I don't know. I couldn't find any sources that explains.
Okay, my second question was, I noticed that Mr. Hayakawa's father was portrayed by a Caucasian actor.
Yeah.
Was there a shortage of Japanese actors who weren't available to take smaller parts in American films?
That's another great question. No, there were so many actors available in Hollywood or around Hollywood as well. So if the studio wanted the actual Japanese people playing the Japanese father of Hayakawa's character, they were able to do that, but they didn't. Even before Hollywood, even before movies, the theatrical plays like The Mikado, Modern Butterfly, there were so many yellow faces, right, quote unquote, Caucasian actors playing non-Caucasian Asian characters. So there was such kind of a tradition or convention in Hollywood as well. So in that sense, The Secret Game didn't use the Japanese actor to play Hayakawa's father. So it's a strange mix, isn't it? Hayakawa playing the Japanese character, but his father doesn't look like Japanese at all.
Thanks, Ellen. I also want to invite people not only to ask, and Marion, you can go next, not only to ask questions, but also let us know what you thought of the movie. I think there's lots to talk about this film. It's problematic, I think. And there's just a lot of things going on. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about the film as well as asking questions. So Marion, please.
My comment isn't about the film, but it's about when I first found out about Sessue Hayakawa. I was 8 years old and he was on Wagon Train. I don't know if you remember that old cowboy movie about a wagon train going across the country to Sacramento. And anyway, he was in it and he was guarding a black box. And then at the end, he brought some disgrace and he committed seppuku. And then that's when my mom had to tell me the whole discussion about what that means, because I didn't know what that meant as a Japanese American. And so, watching that show with Americanized eyes, like, this guy's really strange. So it was but that was my first experience of him when I was 8 years old. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you for sharing your episode. Yeah, that's
and
fantastic.
if you go on Wikipedia, if you type in Wagon Train and his name, they show a picture of him and he is very old. So
that's fabulous. I mean, well, even this film, his death, his kind of a suicide in the end. Story-wise, it's not necessary, don't you think? He doesn't have to die, he already know that, there's a villain waiting for someone coming into that room, and he purposefully does that. But for what? He was able to, keep stay alive. while Katie, the Kitty and the Caucasian guy makes a patriotic American couple. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't decide to do that and chooses his death. It's one way of showing or one way of catering to this expectation.
Well, and that still goes on. You can watch a movie and guess who's going to die? It's the person of color. It's never the
Absolutely, yeah. And to show or to display the sense of honor, which is mysterious image of Japan at that time as well. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Do we have other thoughts or questions about tonight's movie? Oh, John asks about the picture behind you on the wall. What?
the
what is it?
actual, this one, oh, this is
Yes.
Marlene Dietrich.
Is she your favorite? Is she your favorite actress?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Wow. What's your favorite Dietrich film?
There's a film called Angel. It's a Ernst Lubitsch film of 1940. I actually have this is Angel, right?
Wow.
This is a very old postcard. It's a sophisticated comedy by Lubitsch, who came to Hollywood in the 1930s to avoid the Nazism in Germany. And he was a big film director in Germany, UFA, but he made lots of interesting films in Hollywood.
There's one question in the chat. Why did you decide to study Hayakawa?
Good question. I'm not sure, to be honest. So like I said, in 1993, when I was a graduate student, I was so, astonished at the film, The Cheat, and Hayakawa's performance, his presence. And I became really interested in, conducting research on him, knowing more about him, and eventually it became my dissertation. I wasn't really thinking about writing a dissertation or book about Hayakawa, but I became really curious after watching The Cheat. I wasn't really a silent film scholar at that point either. I was more, a contemporary film person, but I turned into a silent film, early cinema scholar because of that film festival, that included The Cheat. So,
I also wanted to bring up someone else because when you and I were talking about possible movies to show tonight, you had suggested Dragon Painter.
Right.
Because we wanted to maybe do a Valentine's Day kind of thing and show a movie that Hayakawa had made with his wife, Tsuru Aoki. So can you talk a little bit about her? Like she was acting before he acted, like she was already in the United States and acting, right? And so what was the trajectory of her career?
Some say that, it was Tsuru who invited Hayakawa to appear in films. So, and Tsuru Aoki, Hayakawa's wife, she was bigger than Hayakawa in, around 1913. She was a stepdaughter of a painter in San Francisco, Aoki J-Sei Aoki. She was an adopted daughter of Aoki J-Sei, the painter in San Francisco. For several, unknown reasons, she ended up appearing in, in movies with Japanese subject matters, and that was rare for female Japanese actors in cinema. So she became kind of like a leading, well, it was during the period of Madame Butterfly, Geraldine Farrar played Madame Butterfly at Met Opera in 1907. And interest in Japanese women, geisha, so big in the United States that there were so many films like Madame Butterfly produced in Hollywood in the very early period. So Aoki was kind of used for those, Madame Butterfly type of films at the early stage. So she became the star before Hayakawa, and maybe Aoki had some interest in young actors, including Hayakawa, and Hayakawa started to appear in those Japanese subject, Japanese films in Hollywood, and they became known each other, and yeah, they got married eventually. And after they got married, Aoki, decided not to continue her career as an actor, and she basically became a housewife for Hayakawa, a supporting character, so to speak. But she, every once in a while, she appeared in Hayakawa's star vehicles, and The Dragon Painter was one of them. I think it's one of the most accomplished Hayakawa films. I mean, the films that Hayakawa produced at his own company. It's a 1919 film, and it is available on DVD. So if you are interested, it's a very romantic story, even though speaking of the gender relations between a husband and wife, it's a little bit problematic because a woman has to sacrifice herself for the success of her husband's career as a painter. But in any case, yeah, it's a very romantic story in which Hayakawa and Aoki played a couple. So, yeah.
Another question is, did they have children?
Oh, Hayakawa and Aoki actually didn't have any children. However, well, Hayakawa was a womanizer. So he, yeah, he had some children, and Aoki actually adopted, the couple adopted them, and Aoki raised Hayakawa's children with other women. In that sense, he was a very problematic person as well. But in any case, yeah, they didn't have their own children.
Mm. And he was quite wealthy, wasn't he? I mean, I saw a picture of this castle that he lived in.
Oh yeah, I mean, when he was a superstar, I think the status of Hollywood stars at that time was even bigger than nowadays. Even these days, superstars like George Clooney and Tom Cruise, they have gorgeous places elsewhere. But Hayakawa at that time, he owned a kind of like a castle. It's called Glengarry Castle, which was in Hollywood. The picture, the photograph that I showed you in my slides, that was before Hayakawa purchased that castle. So that was a bungalow. But after that, yes, he purchased a huge, huge house, like a castle in Hollywood. Yeah, he was very rich.
So he lived an opulent lifestyle. I heard about he stored a lot of liquor during Prohibition. And so he would throw these parties. Is that true?
I don't know. I mean, I didn't attend those parties, so I can't say. But but yeah, there were so many legends. At one point he lost I don't know how many dollars in Monte Carlo, the casino in France, in Europe. A huge amount of money. Those legends, there were so many of them. So yeah, in that sense, Hayakawa was a superstar and super rich.
Mari asks a question about Dragon Painter. She said, did Hayakawa write and or direct it? I learned about Hayakawa when I saw this film with live music.
Oh, I think he had a very strong yes and no to the production as a, at the top of the production company, as a the top person of the production company, but he didn't direct the Dragon Painter. It is based on a interesting story called The Dragon Painter by Mary Fenollosa. She was a wife of Ernest Fenollosa. He was a expert of Japan Japanese studies, and his collection of Japanese art became the basis of the Japanese collection of Boston Fine Arts Museum. So Dragon Painter is written by Fenollosa's wife Mary, and it was adopted to become the film The Dragon Painter. And like I said, Hayakawa had a strong opinion about how that production would go. But I don't think he directed the film. I think the film was directed by William Worthington. Yeah. Yeah.
And she says she loved the images of Yosemite back then. Yeah, they used Yosemite to be Japan, right?
Yes, in the Dragon Painter, yeah, Yosemite. The film was shot in Yosemite, especially the opening sequences, and they put some shrine gate torii or stone lanterns and those Japanese objects to make Yosemite look like Hakone of Japan. Basically, intertitle says it's Hakone in Japan. But interestingly, some film magazines like the Moving Picture World and the New York Times, they said that the landscape of Japan in the Dragon Painter looked really authentic, even though the background is shot in Yosemite. Yeah.
If anybody's interested in seeing Dragon Painter, you can look it up. It's on Vimeo. You can actually rent it for streaming on Vimeo. So you can take a look. You can also find some copies here and there on the internet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really fascinating to learn about this superstar that I don't think most of us really know about. So thank you. We've actually kept you over time, so I'm.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm sorry that we kept you for so long, but I know that your latest book is about early cinema. Again, the silent movies and particularly silent movies in Japan and the Lumiere brothers, right?
Yes.
So we'd love to have you back if you would ever like to come back and visit with us.
Of course. Yeah.
Great. Because I don't think we've even really begun to touch all the ways that we can talk about Japanese and Japanese American identity in film. So I will close by asking, do you have a favorite Japanese film of all time?
Wow, that's a big question. There are so many Japanese films that I like. But if I have to choose one, I am a big fan of Yasujiro Ozu and let's say Tokyo Story. There are so many films by Ozu that I really like. But if I have to choose one, I say Tokyo Story.
Nice, thank you. So I'll say thank you and good night. If people want to check out, please, thanks for joining us for this evening. If anyone would like to stay and say any final parting words to Professor Miyao, please do. This is your chance.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, I'm very honored to be here and I really enjoyed talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting, and thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you for organizing this.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for
Bye.
introducing us to Sessue Hayakawa. Had no idea.
Thank
And
you.
Jane's going to lend me her book. I need to read your book about him.
please do. And let me know, after I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any Japanese speakers out there? Oh, is your book available in Japanese?
Some of them, yes. My cat book is available in Japanese, and my shadow book was translated into Japanese. So yes, yeah, not all of them, unfortunately, but yeah, some of them, yes.
And Kathy, this is really interesting because the Hayakawa films were filmed about the same time as the novel we're reading in the book club, Lament in the Night.
Yes, isn't that great? I thought the
Uh-huh.
timing on that was really great. We have a book club at J-Sei as well.
I see.
And we've been reading an Issei novel called Lament in the Night by Nagahara Shoson. So yeah, so reading about the Japanese American experience around this time, there's no indication that there was this Japanese superstar in the movie theaters at the time. There's because this person, the protagonists of these novels tend to be just people who are just trying to get by. And so, they maybe don't have the money to go see movies, or they have other concerns. So it's just really interesting. It was just such a rich time in the late teens and early 20s. So thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you. Good night.